Nikon D7100. Now we've had some time to use this, test it, put it through its paces. Now when this first came out, 24 megapixel camera, 100% viewfinder coverage, dual SD card slots. The thing is just loaded with features. It really read like a photographer's dream. And Nikon made it happen, and they made it happen for $1,200, which is really an unbelievable price to pay for something like this. Now in that, you're also going to get weather sealing, you're going to get a lot of the professional features, 51-point autofocus system, 15 cross-type focus points in there. It really and truly reads like a dream spec camera. So let's put this to the test and see how it handles. Now when we take a look around the body of this camera, it really feels like a Nikon D7000 and a D600 kind of mixed and merged together. If you're a Nikon shooter on either one of those, you're going to feel right at home. If you're coming out from other systems, there are a couple things that are going to be a little different, some great, some iffy on there, and I'll kind of show you some of those. But one thing new that we have is the I button. Now the I button brings up some of the most used settings, or actually I didn't find that these were settings that I use that much. The only one that I really went into is that new crop mode that they have to go between a DX crop and a 1.3x additional crop on that. I did use this quite a bit. Great feature. I'll go into detail on that later. Now overall, if you're coming from another kind of camera system, there are a couple things to keep in mind. One is, even though the controls are pretty standard for Nikon, there's a couple interesting things. One is you have quick access to a bracket button right here. That's very nice to have. I love having that. I'm not used to having that. If you love HDR, that's a dream come true. You do get 5 frames of auto exposure or exposure bracketing on this camera, which is just enough to do pretty much anything you could think of as far as HDR enthusiasts are concerned. Some of the cameras have 7 or 9, but really and truly I almost never use that many. So you're going to really like what this has to offer. Another thing that's going to be very interesting on this one is the placement of the ISO and white balance buttons. You know, I will say I'm not a big fan. I have a hard time holding this to my eye and still accessing those buttons. So I really wish that they had moved them to the other side of the camera where you'll find them on most other camera systems, or if they had moved them up top like we find them on the Nikon D800 and the Nikon D4. Getting into these are also shared with the zoom buttons as well. So if you're actually looking at a picture or image review is turned on and you try to press that to change your ISO, it's actually going to zoom in the image and not change your ISO. So just some things that are going to take a little bit of getting used to on there. Now another thing that I got to talk a little bit about is this locking dial here. We do have a locking dial, nothing wrong with this. We have similar locking dials on Canon's other systems. The secondary locking dial, man, if you can figure out how to move this with one hand holding the camera and one hand on this lock dial and do it efficiently, all props to you. I really can't figure out how to do both at the same time and really pull it off extremely well. It's just kind of a pain to get to and a pain to use. I mean, you can get it. It's not something that I use all the time, but it's just kind of, I'm just not a huge fan of the way they did it on this camera. Now another thing we'll take a look at is the screen. It's a brand new 3.2-inch screen, 1.2 million dots. It's up from 920,000, I believe, in the previous cameras. Great screen, great looking. It's very sharp, lots of contrast on there, very bright, easy to see in just about every environment. The only thing I'm going to say about it is that the screen, kind of reminiscent of some of the other Nikon cameras, does have a little bit of a yellowish green tint on it sometimes, and it does make it very difficult to get some very accurate colors depending on the situations that you're shooting in. Now another thing I'm going to give Nikon a lot of praise for in this camera is the OK button right here can be programmed to zoom in to 100% or different areas of the frame. That's nice. Once you take a picture and go to look at it and play it back, all you have to do is hit the zoom button and it's going to zoom you in right into the center of the picture. Very nice. You can check your focus really easily. I love having that around. Now another thing, if you're coming from another camera system, is keep in mind that the screen on a Nikon will not stay on all the time. It does turn off every time you hit the shutter on this camera. On some of the other ones it will stay on because they have a sensor judging for your eye. So on this one it won't stay on. That could be a little bit of a pain if you're tripod shooting or shooting at weird angles where you can't see the top of the LCD screen and you have to keep hitting the info button to turn it on. You know, not the biggest deal in the world, but I will say I really wish that they had done it a little bit differently with that. Now when it comes to the AF on this camera, a couple things to keep in mind. 51 points, 15 cross type. That's really kind of a dream AF system for a camera like this, way better than we see at other systems in similar prices to where this camera is at. Now, a couple things that I will say: if there was no spot focus, which I'm used to on a Canon, which has a very, very small dot for focusing in on small areas of your image. And so when taking a picture of something like a bird or something like that, I did find it a little difficult to get in and focus in on those very small eyes or things like that on the screen. But overall, I must say that I love it. The focus points on this camera fill up the frame all the way on the horizontal, almost all the way on the vertical. If you zoom in and use the 1.3 crop, you get even further filling of the frame with the focus points. Really kind of a dream come true when it comes to that. We get a lot of focus points spread out through the entire frame on this camera. The other thing I will say about the focus points, you do have 15 cross type focus points on there. Unfortunately, you know, they're a little geared towards the center of the frame. They're all kind of grouped in the middle, so you don't have any of the cross type focus points on the outside, but you still have 15 to choose from, 51 overall. So I can't really diss it that much. It's still a great system and much better than we see on a lot of other cameras, and I really am happy with the focusing that is on this camera. Now, when it does come to straight up image quality on this, I'm very happy with the pictures. You're talking about pictures that are full of contrast, they're sharp, they look perfect. The only exception would be I did have some color problems when using the auto white balance. Depending on your lighting, if you get into kind of rough lighting, it does gear a little bit more towards kind of a yellowish green, and it really is a little bit difficult to get auto white balance in those settings. Now, I shoot RAW, so it's not a big deal. I recommend you shooting RAW too if you're using this. If you are a video shooter or you do shoot JPEG, you might need to experiment around with some of those custom white balance settings. Go into Kelvin, set your white balance ahead of time. I really wouldn't rely on the auto white balance for something like that. Now, one thing that Nikon does a great job of, and this camera is no exception, is dynamic range. There is just a ton of detail filled into those shadow areas mostly. Not a whole lot on the highlights, more similar to what we're seeing with other cameras. But in the shadows, you can take a very underexposed image and boost it 2 to 3 stops. The image still looks good. You hardly add any grain. No other issues that I was able to see inside the degradation of the picture. Everything still looks great, even when boosting the shadows to that extreme. Dynamic range is really something that's excellent on this camera. So overall, image quality looks great. Now, when we start to get into our low light testing, things looked very good at ISO 1600, really holding its own, almost no grain inside of the images. When we start to bump things up into 3200 ISO, we start to see the grain there. The picture still looks pretty good though, not seeing a whole lot of issues. Even in at 100%, it really doesn't look that bad. Very good for a crop sensor camera. Now, shooting it up to 6400 ISO, you know, even a lot of our pictures that we did shoot without zooming in on them, they've lost their black levels. They've gotten kind of a purple tint to them. You're seeing the color noise creep in there. The regular noise is in there. It really is not usable for a lot of things up at 6400 ISO and more, but I feel very comfortable using this camera at 3200 ISO and below. That's really impressive considering this is a 24 megapixel camera. This isn't some of the smaller DSLRs that we're seeing with 12 megapixels, 16 megapixel, 18 megapixel sensors. 24 megapixels, and we're holding up very well at 3200 ISO. That's definitely impressive for Nikon.